right, friends, welcome back to Day to Day Dev, the podcast about what it's like to be a game designer and the kind of stuff that you go through on the day to day. Now, as I understand it, in between this episode and the last episode, we had a question from the crowd about moving from testing to production. Did you want to elaborate on that question for us a bit, Steve?
Yeah, I think this actually came from a fellow role-playing designer as well, particularly, but others then echoed it. It's easy to keep trying to improve a game and to not know when it's finished.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easiest particularly to get stuck in that because, especially if you pick one project that you're working on for months or even years at a time, and you're like, I'll know somehow magically when it's ready because it'll be perfect.
Mm.
And it's very easy to get stuck in that mode because you're afraid of finishing it, or you think that there'll be some way that you'll know that it's finished. Sometimes you're maybe submitting it and getting feedback, but there's always an infinite amount of testing that you can do on a game. There isn't really a point where it's going to be perfect. So it is very easy to get stuck into that loop and not know how to go, it's finished. I'm not working on it anymore. And if you don't do that, you can get really stuck because you'll be like, oh, something else is broken. So one thing that I find is just to really pick a point, a date in the future or something, and just go, whatever the game at this point, is how I'm going to release it.
Assuming it's not fundamentally broken.
Yeah. I mean, that's tricky about that. You have to, and look, some of this is something you have to figure out through working on it. I think if you feel like you're stuck in a loop, then you probably have done enough, and you really just have to pick a way to get out of it. Especially because one thing I always tell people about game design is that it's very easy to get good at starting things, because if you keep starting new things, your brain is good at learning patterns. So if you start 10 games, your brain gets really good at starting games, and it really wants to keep doing that because it likes doing that. It's good at it. And you never learn how to finish anything, so you don't want to finish things because you haven't learned how. So early on, it's really good to just go, look, I'm going to finish this game, get it as good as I can, put it out in some sort of form, and then walk away from it so it's done, so I learn how to finish something. And then you'll probably go, oh, I could have changed that, or this could have been better, but you can use that for the next game. And if it's working to some extent, you have to be able to walk away, or you'll never finish it and you'll never learn how to finish things.
I think it's interesting because I think there's maybe 3 different schools of thought on this particular thing, right? Far on one side of the graph is AAA video game development, where they have the bare bones of a game and then sell it to all of the customer base and then do testing and fixing later. Which is obviously not ideal for board games because you have to kind of ship everything in the box. And then RPGs, I feel like, is in the middle because you ship an engine and you can always add content later, or you can add things that addendum or whatever in subsequent titles or books or whatever, right? Expansions. It's really easy to do it that way, especially as like a PDF or whatever, because then the publishing is an easy add-on. And then with board games, like, okay, everything needs to be ready in the box, ready to go. And so it feels like there's a certain level of perfectionism with that. But like, you can, there's no perfect game.
No.
I've never seen any game designer play a game and not come away from it without saying I have notes. Like, there's always just whatever you think is best for the product. I always think each individual product is like its own journey of a thing, right? So Castles of Kalira shipped in a very specific state, and it was designed to be more introductory than the more complex version that I had wanted to do. And then the perfect version of the game I went and made later by adding extra cards through promos and stuff like that. So that there is, in my opinion, the best version of the game that exists, but there's quite a lot of collecting and finding the parts to like actually assemble that. But I have a copy of the perfect, and that's all I care about for that, really. And then someone that's really invested can go and find all the other bits and pieces. But then like other games, you just get to a point where you're like, you know what, this is good enough, or like this specific issue, the downside is not great enough for me to have to like hammer myself about trying to fix it. And stuff like that. Like I feel like Clock Tower is a really good example of perfectionism getting in the way of the product, because they lost 3 months to Steven editing the rulebook after the Kickstarter was funded, and a lot of what had changed from launch to final product was just slight word changing in some of the text on the rulebook. And it's like, sure, that is a game that does need a lot of clarity for things to work, but also, I mean, a lot of that stuff probably should have been done in advance. But also, do you really need to be agonizing about it forever for it to be perfect?
Yeah.
Like,
I think what that comes into is the fact that this design process intersects with your release process and your marketing process and your publishing process. And to some extent, like I was saying, an end goal can be good. So sometimes you can go, look, I'm going to start marketing at this point, and a year or 2 years, or at this point, I'm going to launch the Kickstarter, and that way I know what my constraints are. And it does happen sometimes that you'll get to Kickstarter or launch or something, and you go, no, it's not ready. And you have to make decisions about, well, do we delay or not? And yeah, I think, you can err on giving yourself plenty of time, but there are sometimes times where you have to go, look, we really want to go back and make this perfect. But there's also times when you go, look, this is diminishing returns. There's times where you might be spending, 80% of your time on 20% of the changes. And that gets more and more diminishing. I mean, this week we actually had a similar situation. We've got our prototype for the score. But we're not completely happy with the feel of the cards, and that's not something that we can see. Like, they can't just send us a visual picture of the mock-up and go, "How's the art now?"
Yeah,
it has to be about feel. So we've been going through this week, going, "Okay, we need you to send us another prototype to this address," and they've been making that, and they've been going, "Okay, we're going to try this gloss, this covering material." So now we're losing a week or so while that comes over. And so we go to our, backers and say, look, it's going to take an extra week or two. And it's, you have to try to, you've got customer expectations to deal with. So this isn't an easy thing. I mean, Clocktower is a game that has a very long development cycle.
It was 4 years before hitting Kickstarter, from memory.
Yeah. And part of that is just because it's quite large. Part of it's because of how Steve likes to design. He is very methodical. And yeah, that worked for it, though, because it was able to build a lot of momentum behind that. There are going to be some cases where, like, that was sort of, so they're able to sort of compensate for the slow period of delay by the fact that there was just this huge campaign playing the game online and sharing it. So that's one solution. And whatever you're choosing in terms of how long or short your cycle is, and what sort of marketing you're doing, what kind of delays, you have to think about what you can do in advance and after the fact to deal with that. So, if you are really clear about your updates, we do an update every single Monday on the Kickstarter, and we're always really, really transparent about exactly what's going on. And we're also, we've from the get-go, we've said we want this to be a really beautiful game. So when we say we need to have this little shift, our customers are already aligned with that value. There are people who like, oh, we understand they're being transparent. We understand this is about quality because I've primed them by saying this is what we care about. And so, yeah, as you go along, and that's why marketing is important to start early because it actually helps you understand what your values of the product is and start to build the audience that supports that. Um, the Clock Tower fans were built up as being, fanatical and happy to wait because they have lots of stuff. So that was built from the beginning to handle some delays, so they can handle that a bit more. And yeah, I'm not saying that they made the right choice to delay, but they have options built in.
I think one interesting thing is that when I read the question initially, it came across as a person asking purely about gameplay problems.
Right.
And what was interesting was that you were like, okay, well, actually, here is a thing about production.
Yeah.
And I think that that's interesting as well, because when you're playtesting something, not only are you just looking at gameplay, you're also looking at maybe production, because you go, oh, can I solve this with a different component? Do I need more player boards? Do I need, how is that going to affect my scale and the cost of my product? And I think a lot of these kind of things are tough questions to really answer when you're in that I'm not sure what my final product looks like stage in, kind of playtesting and stuff like that. And I think the analysis of the problem should give you the answer of how worried about it you should be. How close am I to actually launching this thing? And when you're not as worried about something, then and that could come from you being a first time thing, or you've done it 7 times and you're on the 7th time like, oh, this isn't a big problem. I will just find out what thickness the cards are later or whatever. And so you're trying to find out exactly what kind of a problem it is. So I assume in playtesting there's going to be, so for example, Murders at Seawoods Manor, the core gameplay loop was solid for like 2 years. And then right at the end, it was like, okay, actually, I want to change the tiebreaker mechanic. Mm-hmm. And to me, I'm like, that wasn't a huge threat to the product. It's something that would make the player journey a bit smoother and a bit nicer. And that was then something I added on at the end, which created a whole another mechanic, which added another component. So I'm like, okay, This is now suddenly an in-depth solution. And it turned out to be really for the good of the game. But before this had happened, I was like, I'm done playtesting. I put it through, and then it was only because I had really good feedback that really, really articulated what the problem was. Because I played it with another developer, and he was like, okay, this is the thing I have an issue with. This was how it made me feel at the start of the game, which was angry, and I didn't get to stop being angry until the end of the game when I could tell you about this. And I'm like, okay, well, that's an issue that I want to fix. And so I think getting really needle-pointed feedback as well can be really good for that, where not only do you, I think for the most part, ignore what is said in the playtesting feedback, except for the identification of the problem and how it made them feel. Because if they were like, this is a thing that sucked, and you're like, okay, something about this thing made you frustrated, but whatever their suggestion is to fix it is probably not what you're going to implement, like anyway. And so then you go, okay, how do I fix this problem so that is not the emotion that they're dealing with upon encountering this thing? But most of the time, when you have a solid core gameplay loop, a lot of the things that people will point out in testing is so superfluous and unnecessary, or it's stuff you've already encountered and gone, oh, maybe it's fine. And I think second guessing yourself a lot of the time can be what's delaying that playtesting. Because you've changed something and then someone has still commented on it and you're like, oh no, I just changed it. Is it not fixed? Do I need to come back to what it was before? Do I need to try something new? And sometimes something being almost perfect is still fine. Like there's no game that doesn't have a thing that could be improved. That's why new games come out, because most of them are 60% the same as something else with something fixed. So I just think you've got to really identify what is your pinch point, really.
I think as I say, as you sort of alluded to there, like if you're going backwards and forwards, that's probably a sign that you're finished. I think it was Kim Bruback who told me that. Like when I was first trying to balance Baby Dragon Bedtime, we were trying to figure out exactly how many points cards versus mechanics cards, and we were sort of going back and forth between like about 8 1 points and 4 2 points, and then it was like 7 1 points and 4 2 points, and then and I was really running through, many dozens and hundreds of tests with slightly different numbers, and like,
Mm.
if you're that close, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
That's how you
1% better
know.
doesn't change anything,
That's
right?
right. Yeah, and it's when that's actually how you know you're there,
Yeah.
because you are, if you're toggling between two small states, you go, well, I must be in the right. It doesn't matter.
Mm.
That's the sign that I've got the right point.
Mm.
And it's often those small things that can actually make a game as well. Like something slightly overpriced makes this, or slightly underpriced, or something makes the game a bit more interesting, because everyone's like, okay, well, that's the thing that's really good. So now there's a
Mm.
bit of a meta about how do we get access to that, and how do we, um, yeah,
I think about that a
and yeah,
lot, actually, because I think humans are really, really good at recognizing outliers.
yep,
You see a lot of time in other categories. And I think in gaming, when people recognize outliers, they either go, this is really, really good, or this is really, really bad. If in your playtesting, you're removing all these really, really good and really, really bad things, it's kind of narrowing down interesting points of like discussion or discovery for players sometimes. Something
yep,
is allowed to be bad, but they
yeah,
might
yeah.
need to mitigate that or avoid that or do something like in an interactive way rather than it just being something that impacts them negatively.
Yeah. Um, there's also things can be like a choice or an option can be suboptimal except under a certain number of circumstances.
Mm.
So you can go like, this power almost not worth taking, but it's still in the game because one time out of 50 or something, someone's going to have all those cards and then it will kick in.
Mm.
And that's okay. You can go look, and people learn as they play to go, oh, that's more overpowered, or that is underpowered. And as I say,
Yeah.
metas develop.
I
I remember,
actually had this exact moment. I built a Marvel Snap deck, right?
yeah,
And the combo is these exact three cards. You play them in that exact order, you win the game. All right?
yep,
And I go, okay, this is all I have to do. And then I had a backup in there that I had just never used because it never came up. And then in the one scenario, I have the backup in hand. I see the exact situation where the backup is required. And I'm like, that's why I put this in here.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Um, and yeah, it's like that card's slightly weaker, so it's like, why would you need it? But there is a situation,
Mm.
um, or just doesn't everything else doesn't fire. Um, when when Seven Wonders came out, it was a
Mm.
huge hit, very very popular. It is arguably unbalanced because the science cards are really the biggest point score.
Mm.
And I remember seeing a thread where someone said, "We played this about 100 times, and now we don't play it anymore because we know science unbalanced." And first of all, you played it 100 times, and that was part of your experience, finding where these things were, finding out which is the best point source.
Homie,
That's
that's
part of the
10
fun.
times more than the average game makes the
Yeah,
table. You've finished
exactly.
Seven Wonders. You can
Yeah,
retire. Like,
you don't need your money back. You've played it 100 times. That's
yeah.
absolutely worthwhile. And even then, even if it was, even without that, you still have to go, well, like the thing about science in that game is you have to kind of hoard it. So if
Mm.
everyone's hoarding it, then nobody actually can do it because everyone's taking the little bit. So, um, yeah, it was a very revealing comment, because games can have these highs and lows, and
Mm.
games can be exploring processes where you just go, look, that just never seems to pay off. And no tester can actually check, like a single human person can't test things to oblivion.
Yes.
Not, I remember there was a famous thing once when I was a Warhammer player where they put the rules out, and of a new edition, it was probably sixth or seventh or something, and within an hour, someone was like, oh, "I found a mistake. This rule doesn't work. It's completely contradicted by this." And someone's like, "Oh, how could they dare put out this game? When there's things wrong with it." And the designers point out that like 100,000 people had downloaded it on the first day, and that was 100,000 hours of playtesting that effectively
Mm.
happened in this short
Instantly.
period of time,
Yeah.
and that would take like 40 years of one person playing Warhammer to find it
Yep.
because of the, yeah. So Now, obviously, most games aren't going to have that many huge downloads, but if you have a successful game, like again, 7 Wonders, huge hit. I think it won a Spiel des Jahres, and people played it hundreds and hundreds of times. And Bowser did a great job on the game, but there's no way he could have tested it that much. He tried his best to make everything balanced, but eventually, I remember they also did that with Beyond the Sun. They put that on BGA, and they had something like 10,000 games of it in a year that they got data on. And then they went, oh, this one of the cards in the game after about 40 is overpowered, and they've now changed it. And someone got on BGG and was like, oh, how come they broken cards? Like, nobody can test a game that much. It's just not physically possible for like 2 humans in a game company to find absolute perfection that is going to stand up to thousands and thousands and thousands of plays.
Also, 1 card in however many cards in that game, that's an acceptable failure rate. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So I guess one of those lessons is don't listen to people on BGG. They're crazy.
Absolutely.
And you might get negative feedback when you release a game, but you shouldn't let that stop you from releasing it. Because
homie, you're going to get negative feedback before you fucking release a game.
That's right. And you might get feedback from people who never play your game.
Yeah.
People go, I saw this game and I decided I didn't like it because I don't like the color, and therefore I'm going to write a bad review about it.
Well, talking about BGG, my game Spirits of Carter Mansion, which is a haunted house game, it's like literally based on some Stephen King stuff. Its first review was a 1-star review saying, I am advocating for child murder. And I'm like, I don't even know how to respond to this. You've never played the game. It's not even released yet. There's maybe 6 people that have played it in total. How could you have this very solidified opinion that it's a 1-star game based on this one thing? And it's just like, maybe their opinion isn't really worth that much.
Yep. And once you getting that sort of some of these stories under your skin will help you possibly get out of that editing thing. Because a lot of it's fear. That fear of being criticized, of not being good enough, and understanding that these games have errors, and that people will always find something to complain about.
Well, I think that's funny, actually, right? Like, if you're planning on being a career designer, you will make shit games. I make shit games all the time. I arguably have only made 1 good game, and it's not even a board game. And I'm still here in the industry. I still have a career doing this. So, it's that whole, you have to take so many shots. Oh no, you miss all the shots you don't take or some shit. Where it's look, unless if you're actually publishing games and actually getting them out there and doing something with them, then they're forever terrible until people actually get to play them. Playing them is the victory, not it being a 10 out of 10 on BGG. So...
Yeah. People playing them is the victory, absolutely. It's really well said.
And sometimes that's you and your friends. Like, if you're playing this game with your friends and having a good time, that's still a victory. You made something. That didn't exist before you came around. I think, that's something worth celebrating. I made a game that my parents enjoy playing. Did it blow up in Kickstarter? No. There's still victories to be had here.
Yep. Absolutely. And a game might not be able to find a market, especially these days or something, and you're just like, but it really does work. I made these people laugh and smile. I like it is true that you probably make some bad games in there, and then you just go on to make the next one, or there'll be things that get in the way, like you made your game at the same time as another game came out, and so everyone went for that one or something. You were working on a really cool social deduction, but you got swallowed up by blood on the clock tower, so nobody noticed. Or one thing that happened, so I with my game, there's been a murder. There is some flaws in it that the company put in when they changed some of my rules, and I know why they did it. So they wanted to make it a bit simpler. There was a few things that I had to make sure that you couldn't just luck your way into a win. And they went, those rules are a bit more complicated given our wider audience, so we're down. So now, about one time in 100, get dealt pretty much instant win. And sometimes people will play it once and go, "This is boring. There's no strategy." And I'm like, well, that wasn't a choice that I made. That was a choice that they made.
Yeah.
And that happens. Like, and so you'll also, so it might not be your fault. It might be just someone else, another stakeholder. The art won't be right. The printing will go wrong. You know, there are a lot of people involved in a game, a lot of things going on, and you might just get to the end and like something isn't as perfect as you want it to be for whatever reason. And that happens. And yeah, so a bad game can occur for lots of reasons. It might not have the right setting. It might not have the right name.
Well, imagine you put thousands of hours into perfecting the game. You did millions and millions of playtests. You spent 40 years getting it correct. And then something completely out of your control makes it a dud or whatever. 3 out of 10 on BGG.
Yep. Just before you release your incredible game about the Suez Canal gets blocked, and everyone thinks your game is a joke or something like that. You can't control some of that stuff. Yeah,
that's a really good example, actually.
Absolutely. I mean, we're called Tin Star Games, and at one point we were going to have sort of like a loyalty program where everyone could be like a Tin Star sheriff or something, and then there was all the Black Lives Matters process and people pointing out about the brutality of police people. And I'm like, oh, that suddenly looks really, really bad. Get rid of that. We weren't like creating real cops, but everyone's like, oh, I don't want to be a Tin Star cop.
Yeah,
that's weird. And yeah, things change. Names change. And that's why sometimes you'll see these days increasingly games get changed. Like they get reskinned, tweaked. They'll change the way the components work, and your same game can be re-released in a different way or in a different form. There's another. It's not about games, but the guy who ended up writing the TV show Deadwood, which is now like 12, 15 years old, but it was a huge hit. He originally went into a studio with a huge pitch about he was a historian. He loved ancient Rome. He wrote like an 8-episode series of a show about Rome under Nero. Walked into the office and started pitching it. And they go, "Oh no, we just signed a Rome show. That was that show Rome," and he had to just go, "I don't have anything." But he went away for half a day and came back and pitched Deadwood. But his whole life had been like, "Yeah, I'm going to make this Rome show." And too late. If you've been here yesterday, maybe, but today we've signed it. And so that kind of thing can happen, yeah.
Well, especially if you're a career designer, you are bigger than the game.
That's right, yeah.
So there's no one game that is your crown jewel thing. There is just ideas and expressions of what you're working on. And parts of those things will exist in other games. Parts of those things might be shelved, and then you'll put parts that apart for later. So this spec that is written up for Rome might have character development, might have plot lines and stuff that'll fit in any setting, and it can be reused and put back together into these other things. Might have casting ideas, might have setting, prop pieces, all this kind of stuff that can still be reused in other places because it's the creative muscles that you flex and get jacked that is the thing that matter rather than this one particular thing that you accomplished one time. Like it's got to be more than the sum of what you've created, because if your entire self-worth or your entire career is based on one product, if that one product does badly, then you're going to feel like you're shit at this one thing that you've been doing for years, and that's probably not the case. Right? I don't know you, viewer, personally, but I've never met anyone that's presented me a game and I've gone, wow, this is horrible. Why are you here? I've seen games that I personally would not enjoy, but I can understand the value or the new critique or the new, representation of a mechanic or idea that it brings around. And I go, this has value to someone. I've never seen a game and been like, wow, this is a complete waste of time. Like,
no. There's always something there that's worthwhile. And even if it does poorly, someone else will pick it up, and can look at it and go, "Oh yeah, I saw that." Another person that you might work with or another company or something, like pitching them a game and go, "Oh yeah, I saw your game like that. It was pretty bad, but the way that you did initiative or the way you did this, I really liked that. So I noticed that was clever." the other people will pick up on those victories
I really
inside
like
a
that.
game that might does.
I really like that analogy in movies because there's always
Yeah,
that really terrible movie that someone it's their favorite movie. You know,
yeah,
it's like a 3 out of 10 on IMDb, and someone's like, "No, I still love this to death."
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that surely is the same for every type of art, every type of media. There's if you made a game, it might suck, but one person might play it, and it was a really special, unique experience for them, and that motivated them in some way. Then that's value. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I think possibly the mistake is to, yes, we've been talking about to go. I want to make a game that makes $1 million or something, or that wins a
hmm,
Spiel des Jahres, or
or
something that you
the
have no
perfect
control over.
game, yeah.
I did have someone come to me and they said, I want to make the next Rubik's Cube. And you can't control that. You cannot make something that is going to be as big as the Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
You can't guarantee that, the number of things that would have to line up for your game to be as huge as something like that, um, is astronomical. What you can do is try to make something that's as fun as a Rubik's Cube and then see what happens, you know?
Mm, that's crazy. I feel like having
Yeah.
gigantic financial success as a goal is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean it's a very precarious thing, because as we've said, there's just a lot of things that can get in the way,
Mm.
and a lot of things that need to line up.
Well,
But
setting a
you can
goal that's
control.
just so far away, right? Setting a
Yeah.
goal that's so not instantly achievable. Because let's say your goal is to make $1 million, right?
Mm.
All of the campaigns that have made $1 million have spent probably a third of that in marketing, have spent
Yeah, at least. Yep.
years of time running the game. Or, for example, what Clock Tower did was they went to every single convention.
Yeah.
Every
All over
one
the
of
world.
them. Yes.
Huge
Every one
amounts
of
of money.
them. They had a team of heaps of people and hundreds of volunteers. You, viewer, as one person who wants to make millions of dollars and does not have any of those things, it's probably pretty unlikely. So setting a more realistic goal of the first stone in the first step of the journey is going to be much more achievable, much less soul crushing when it's a difficult obstacle, right?
Yeah, so it might be publishing a game, funding a game,
Mm.
getting someone else to publish a game for you, getting a game signed. That was one of my big goals, and I finally got that, and that's still amazing, and that's a huge goal, especially with the market these days, uh, and that's something I can have a bit more control. But also, you might even think about, well, what am I from? I want to finish a game as a goal. Make a game that
Mm.
has, whatever it is. Like, I want to make a game that is a very deep strategy game. That's a really good goal, that makes me really engaged. And then you can see if you can publish it or not. But if you succeeded at something that made you feel like some other game that you like, then that's something you have a lot of control over. And you can, the more that you give yourself achievable goals, the better you're going to feel.
Mm.
And control is, I mean, this is like game design. If you played a game where you just roll dice and try to roll a can, you don't feel like that's a fun game because you don't have any control. You're
Mm.
just like, oh, I didn't roll a 20, so I didn't win.
The
But
choices
if
that
you play,
you'd made didn't lead up to the success.
that's right.
Yeah.
So if you're making a game, you don't make it all that round. You go, okay, here, make week fate. And there are lots of games that people can lose and still enjoy because they're like, hey, I got all of the green cards, which I've never done before. I made my track really, really long across Europe, and I
Mm.
scored this really difficult card I've never done. I have a friend who plays Dominion, and his goal is always to just get all the draw extra cards so that he gets to go through his deck hundreds of times. That's
Yeah.
all he cares about. He doesn't care
Yeah.
about winning. He just like, I want to build something.
Want to make the best engine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the way to sort of, approach a career as well, or a creative pursuit, is to go, what is something that I can that there's always going to be, there might always be better at this than me who's going to score higher. There's going to be luck, but I wanted to buy all the green cards and I did. That the same sort of thing is like, my goal is to, work on a game every single day of a month, or every weekend for a year, or something like that. That's another control, and
Well,
just try
one
to.
of my goals right now is a YouTube video every day.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm 2.5 months in or something like that.
yeah, and that's
It has good days, it has bad days, it has great game design days. I actually have a video in the can where I put up a post on Facebook, which was, what do you think is the worst possible things that could go into a board game? And I took them all and I tried to make a game with as many of those things as possible, um, which is very hard.
that
When you
got out
spend
of
all your time
hand.
making good games, it's hard.
That might be better to pick one or two. Yeah, but
Mm.
that's actually. I mean, that's a good thing to just practice yourself as well. To like, can I make a game that is small? Can I make a game? That's
Mm.
especially as you go on. Like if you make a few successful things, you get this ton of. Well, what else can I do?
Yeah,
Um,
challenging yourself to increase your skills, I
yeah,
think, is very important.
and that's again why you don't want to put too much on this one game,
Mm.
because it's the next game and the next game that you're going to be able to push yourself and do more and do better, and then start going, oh, I didn't know I could do that.
Mm.
Um, um, and you you get to go on this little journey and go, oh, I don't think I can do that, and then you find out you do. I mean, I had a lot of that in all the time through my career. Like, um, there was a time in when I was working on the Shadow of the Demon Lord RPG. I'd done a bunch of stuff for. Oh, this setting about the land of the dead and the gods and stuff, and I'm like,
Mm.
really my vibe. I always like to concentrate on the more regular stuff, and the publisher was really good. He said, I think you can do this if you so think about it a bit longer. And I challenged myself, and I found it, and was a really well accepted and well regarded supplement. And that's a wonderful thing to do. Again, to go to find out, oh, I can do that.
Mm.
But you have to have a bit of confidence behind you. Like, I'd written a few other things to get me, before I went, oh, that's what I'm really good at. But I knew that because I had done a few things.
Yeah, well, trying it, right, is the first step to finding out what is the challenge, what is the thing that you needed to do,
Yeah,
what could you possibly do, or was that product in particular, like the trying it or like testing yourself or like doing something different, was that idea something that became the bedrock later for a more important product? Like that
that's
happened
right.
for
Yeah.
me. Spirits of Carter Mansion, colossal failure. But the mechanical design of it became the bedrock for Spaceship Redoubt, which was much more of a success. And without those lessons, I mean, because like Spirits of Carter Mansion, specifically, the idea was to deconstruct a lot of the different things from the social reduction genre and have a look
Mm,
about what pinch points players that don't like the genre and like try and navigate them. And then when looking at something that was more specific to the people that did really enjoy it, I was like, okay, we're going to take the best bits about all the negotiation parts and put it in here. And it worked really well because it matched
yeah.
the theme, it matched the whole new idea. And it was like, this game release was maybe a failure. And that was because I took something that probably didn't need to be published. It was probably just a learning experience. But what it did teach me was that maybe not everything I make is a hit. Maybe everything I make is sometimes, I got to pick things from my slate and stuff like that, and then put it together into something that did work. And I think
Mm,
that's the same. You got to find out, some games that, you might have done something as a joke or as a test that turned out to be really, really good. And that can find that out from, playtesting feedback. If they go, actually, if you change one or two things, this would be as good as Gloomhaven or whatever. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe I'll work on this more, or maybe the whole idea was that this was half of an idea of a design challenge to maybe build up to something that was more
mm,
complicated and fit better in
yeah.
this theme and style or whatever. So I think it's all just skill development, really.
It really, yeah. Um, and that's why it's good to really to finish some things so that you can start developing, because you're using the same muscle. It's like you're trying to build muscle and all you're doing is one arm.
Mm.
You've got to go, oh, I'm going to put that down and do the other arm, or pick a different sport, or play a
Mm.
different position, or something like that. And yeah, I really like you. Sometimes the failure can be a really good learning lesson as well. Because this isn't, but what part of what made maybe that game contribute to it is that you were trying to do ambition there. And that's always a thing. If you can go, well, it didn't succeed, but that's maybe because I was trying to do way too much at once.
So trying to hit a market that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Because you don't know until that comes out, right?
That's right. Yeah, and you can always the phrase in comics is it didn't find a market. It didn't fail. It just didn't find a market, and that So you can always go. Like, there's always compensations. There's lessons learned, and there's things how to handle things when RPG. Sometimes you're just going to be like, this game works for me, but and maybe 5 other people, and that's all it does, and therefore we don't sell it.
You might be a really specific target market.
Yeah.
Like me as a game designer is probably going to enjoy a game differently from a person that has no experience in game design.
Yeah. I'm constantly surprised that Partners, my RPG, sells as well as it does, because I thought nobody else but me would like it. Because it's a bit weird. It doesn't really have what most RPGs have of you sort of really deciding what you're going to do. Is you draw these cards and go, oh, okay, we have. And that's very different. And the score's like that too. And there's always a part of me going, really? You did like that? That's weird. But that's what can happen. Sometimes you'll be like, everyone just goes, no, we don't like that. And sometimes you go, oh, no, we do like that.
That sounds like a voice of doubt on your behalf rather than...
Yeah. It probably is. It's hard to be a bit different. It's hard to be an artist and just go, I think the universe needs this. Because that's a big thing to say, to go,
yeah,
hey, I'm going to make this and I don't care what anyone else says. That's quite scary.
Well, I get advice like that all the time, right? Kevin Smith was like, for Clerks, he's like, I knew this was the thing I had to do, so I put everything on the line. I got all the money that I needed to do. We shot it in the middle of the night just to make this movie happen. And then later on in his career, he's like, I had that same feeling about Tusk. I took out an extra mortgage. I made all this thing, and I made that stupid fucking walrus movie. And he's proud of having done it, but that movie was so horrifying that I called in sick to work the next day. I don't know that the universe really needed it, but he accomplished something.
Yeah, that's the thing about being an artist, is that you're going to have that I need to make this vibe, and sometimes it will be like, yeah, that was the right thing to do. Other people responded to it. Sometimes the universe will go, no, we didn't need that. And you don't know. That's one of those things that's outside your control. All you can go is, I'm trying to do whatever I can to fulfill the strange ideas in my head.
Yeah, create. That's it. You just got to create.
Yeah, but you have to finish it. You have to go, here it is, world, judge it. And the judging is, it's okay if they don't like it. The point is, as we've said over and over, is getting to the giving it to other people.
Yeah, I think there's got to be a point where playtesting will build confidence in you about a product. You'll play something a few times, you're confident in it, you're happy to show it to other people. When they play it, they either have feedback that you can put in a box and you say, oh, this is kind of meaningless. I don't think changing this would really make a big difference or whatever. And then you get to a certain point where you're confident in the game as a product. And then you go, okay, what's next? Am I publishing this? Am I pitching this? Am I developing this? For me, with Murders at Two Woods Manor, it was something that I made, and I was like, this is really cool. I really like how this comes together. But I don't have the confidence in it because the development costs are going to be greater than what I have. So I'll put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
And then I had a friend come over who had never seen any of the games that I had designed before. So I kind of like pulled out some stuff, and I was like, here's this that I made. Here's this thing. Here's actually Murders at Two Woods Manor, like the original prototype that looks like a piece of shit. And I was like, this is a game that I put on my shelf because I don't have any money to develop it, but maybe now is the time. And it was like all of that confidence that I had in it originally, because I knew it was a banger, had instantly been reinstilled in me. And I was like, okay, this is what we're working on now. This is the go, this is the plan. And I think some of that either comes from, experience of working on something, or maybe there's certain playtesters that you want to get the nod from, right? Like, like feedback that you can really trust, that you're confident that the game is good. Like, I know people that are yes men, and if I showed them something, they'd be like, that was really cool, and you're like, that's great, but unless if you said you hated something, your opinion isn't super helpful. And then there's other people that are like always super negative about stuff, or like super deconstructive about things and just want to pull it apart. And if they look at it and they go, this minor thing was like maybe something to change, but otherwise it's pretty good. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe I'm really close. Maybe I am there. And a lot of these specific pieces of feedback, I think, get you to a point where you go, I'm confident in this product. And you just got to know when to send it, right? Like it's never done.
It's never done.
There's no game that you can't go back and change something and make it better, because you will always have grown as a designer. You will always improve your skills and get better. Nothing is ever perfect. Everything is a snapshot of your exact journey and your skill set in that time. And unless if you want to wait until 5 seconds before you die and to publish something, because it's as good as it could possibly get under your leadership.
Go now! Yep.
Right? Then maybe you got to hit that button sometimes. Maybe you got to, take that risk, get that courage to walk that final step and press the button. Sometimes it'll flop and sometimes it won't. And until you find out and learn from those mistakes, because there's like a whole testing campaign based on like fail faster, which is like until it's been shit a couple times, it can't be good. I think that is really true. And I've been shit for a long time. Arguably, I haven't stopped. And maybe one day I'll be good. That's the dream, right?
It's not being good that matters. It's not stopping that matters.
Exactly.
Just keep doing it.
Exactly.
I think actually though, all that thing about like types of playtesters, and we can talk about that next week. That could be a really good subject about how to playtest, how to drill down, how to recognize different voices. That would be a good topic.
Yeah, I think different player archetypes in the playtesting and the different kind of skills that those playtesting people will have will make a big difference. Like if you had your game playtested by a graphics designer, you'll get different feedback than if you had your game playtested by a race car driver. That's for sure.
Yep.
And I think maybe that is something maybe worth exploring in the next episode. Because I think playtesting is something that the average designer will either show up to like for example, we just have a once a month event where people come and bring stuff, but everyone that comes there is a game designer or aspiring game designer, right? Still game designer. But then maybe the more isolated, because in Australia there's maybe 7 people and it's pretty tough to rub us together at any particular time. As you've noticed, Steve is on Discord and not in my lounge room. And so maybe finding that kind of skill in testing might be difficult, and you're playing against the average person. Maybe people that don't even play board games. Maybe the only playtesters you have access to is family members that don't like board games, or video game players instead. And the kinds of feedback that you're going to get from these people is going to be very different. So maybe that should be our next episode. I'm sure there's a few things we can.
Well, next week we do have we have our once a month testing, so we can definitely come back, talk about playtesting, talk about what we did at the playtesting thing
on a Tuesday as well. So we will have literally just done it before we record for the week.
Right,
that's really handy.
So and also send us any questions you have about playtesting. Absolutely.
I'm curious to know. I'm curious to know what the average viewer, what their expectation of being a playtester is, and as a designer, what their expectation of being giving playtesting feedback should be like. Because honestly, I think it's very different from like the different people's perspective. Because how I use playtesting is I just kind of vibe check everyone's feedback, and I know that's not super helpful. But if someone is really upset about something, then I care about it. If someone's like, I don't care about it.
Definitely. I mean, I think games are very emotional things.
Well, art is in general, right? Like that's the whole idea.
So you're looking for emotion, and emotional feedback. All right, we'll come back and talk about that next week, because it's 9:00, I think.
It is. It is.
Well, not when you're listening to this, but it's time to say goodbye.
Yeah, we have a really nice little recording window for us to get stuff done, but unfortunately, it means that we have to do work stuff on the rest of the day.
That's right.
So that is this episode. I hope that did help answer the question of when do you think something that you are playtesting is done and is ready. So we did, we're not super great at saying really on topic, and I know that we did divert and talk about a whole bunch of other stuff, but some of it's contextually relevant. Some of it will hopefully give you some ideas about where we're at where it comes to those kinds of questions, because everything is pretty subjective. But
if you want us to clarify anything, just write it in the comments underneath.
absolutely,
We'll definitely see it.
I love chatting about stuff in the comments. That's where I'm at when there's comments.
Yep. Like, subscribe, comment. Absolutely comment. The algorithm loves that. And, yep. And we love to chat.
Absolutely. So that's Steve Dee, my good friend and game designer. I'm Keith Franks, and we make games, and you can find them in the description of this video while you're busy writing out your comments. And hopefully we'll see you next week for the next Day-to-Day Dev.